Ecodesign for Energy-Related Products and Energy Information Amendment, Northern Ireland Regulations 2025.
I call the Minister to move the motion. Minister Miatta van Boon.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable members, I beg to move that the Ecodesign for Energy-Related Products and Energy Information Amendment, Northern Ireland Regulation 2025, which was laid before the House on the 4th of March 2025, be approved. This instrument forms an important part of the Government's commitment to ensuring energy-related products are sustainable and efficient by enabling new regulations to be enforced as they apply to Northern Ireland. Eco-design policies aim to reduce environmental impacts of products by reducing their energy consumption, reducing carbon emissions and saving businesses and consumers money on their energy bills. As honourable members will already understand, following our exit from the European Union, Great Britain has simulated its regulatory regime for energy-related product standards into domestic law, which we may in future amend. Honourable members will also be aware of the agreement reached by the UK and the EU regarding the Windsor Framework, which was passed overwhelmingly by a large majority in this place. The Windsor Framework helps ensure the flow of trade within the UK internal market by removing trade barriers and safeguarding Northern Ireland's place in the Union. It allows Northern Ireland to maintain dual market access by continuing to apply EU rules with respect to the regulation of energy-related products. Therefore, it is vital that we keep the enforcement legislation for Northern Ireland up to date. The instrument will update both the Eco-Design for Energy-Related Products Regulation 2010 and the Energy Information Regulation 2011 with respect to Northern Ireland. These updates will ensure that the specific Northern Ireland tables in the 2010 and 2011 regulations accurately reflect the latest product-specific eco-design and energy labelling measures and enable these measures to be enforced by the relevant market surveillance authority. There are 7 new product regulations that will apply in Northern Ireland, which range from smart phones through to tumble dryers through to heaters. The eco-design regulations seek to improve the energy efficiency of all products, whilst new energy labelling regulations reflect new labelling standards. Repairability and recyclability of products have been included for the first time under EU eco-design and certain energy labelling regulations to ensure further sustainability and benefit consumers. The statutory instruments will ensure that these schedules continue to reflect the most up-to-date versions of these EU eco-designs of energy labelling measures in force, whether amended or replaced, whilst minimising the need for further updates to the enforcement regulations. The requirements updated by this instrument will not restrict manufacturers' ability to sell into the EU or Northern Ireland unless they are not willing to meet the EU regulations. The EU's highest standards are likely to become the industry default, and we can assume manufacturers are likely to choose to meet these standards. If this is the case, these measures will have no impact on traders who abide by the relevant standards. Since Great Britain is looking to achieve higher product efficiency, it is very likely that Great Britain will seek to meet similar standards. As such, we will be consulting as soon as possible on the merits of mirroring with the new EU regulations with the first of these on tumble dryers expected to be launched shortly. Our intention is to apply the measures on a UK-wide basis and maintain the UK's internal market. Our consultation will be on the appropriate means to achieve this aim. As such, I commend these regulations to the House.
For His Majesty's loyal opposition. The question is, the committee has considered the Eco-Design for Energy-Related Products and Energy Information Amendment, Northern Ireland Regulations 2025. Shadow Minister Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under you and your charismatic and very generous chairmanship this evening, and to respond to the draft Eco-Design for Energy-Related Products and Energy Information Amendment, Northern Ireland Regulations 2025, on behalf of His Majesty's opposition. By ensuring products meet minimum requirements for energy efficiency, we agree that regulation can reduce their negative environmental impact, make them longer lasting, and encourage greater recycling. Energy labelling also gives more information to consumers, helping them to make better informed decisions about their energy usage. In principle, energy efficiency clearly helps to reduce bills and emissions. We understand that this particular regulation needs to be implemented as part of the Windsor framework. But we would like to offer just a word of caution to ministers. These regulations put a modest compliance cost on manufacturers that sell their goods in both Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But the government is now considering aligning the whole of the UK with net zero laws written and decided in Brussels. We would not only be signing up to the European Union emissions trading scheme with its significantly higher carbon price, and increasing our carbon price has not been ruled out by ministers in a succession of answers to our questions, but a whole slew of regulations that will be enforced by the European Court of Justice. There certainly needs to be cooperation with our European neighbours, but we must also maintain our sovereignty and flexibility in an increasingly volatile world. Brussels will, understandably, always act in the interests of the European project and its member states. That's why we must protect the interests of our citizens by putting British industry and consumers first.
Anyone else want to catch my eye? Robin Swan, I saw first.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And indeed, I rise to oppose these regulations. Not because I'm against improving energy efficiency, but because, in our opinion, they represent yet another example of actually unfair and unnecessary regulation being imposed on Northern Ireland. So while the government has insisted that these measures are vital, that it is noticeable, Chair, that they are choosing to consult on similar regulations that will be implemented across the rest of the United Kingdom, while simply imposing them on Northern Ireland. So why, I would ask the Minister, is it acceptable to consult on one part of the United Kingdom but not the other? These are regulations that I know the Minister did reference some items that they would cover. These regulations will cover air conditioning units, comfort fans, computers, domestic ovens, hobs. There's a catch-all phrase for all electrical and electronical household and office equipment. They will also cover electric motors, electronic displays, dishwashers, tumble dryers, washing machines, light sources, fridges, smartphones, mobile phones, space-saving heaters, vacuum cleaners, water pumps, and indeed welders. So these regulations do have an impact on everyday life and everyday items in Northern Ireland specifically, which won't be affected across Northern Ireland. So those items, as listed, Chair, are parts of everyday life for each of us, indeed not just for each of us, but for each of our constituents. Therefore, I would ask the members, and indeed other members of this committee, why, in recognition of the implementation of these regulations, are my constituents of less importance or less worth than those of the constituents of a Welsh, a Scottish, or indeed a Cornish MP? And why do we have to accept such a differential and disruption on supply of these goods where they are forced upon the people of Northern Ireland? So why does Northern Ireland continue to be treated as an afterthought when it comes to regulation? This instrument, as drafted, follows a pattern we have seen before. Northern Ireland being forced to align with EU-derived rules, while the rest of the United Kingdom retains the flexibility to shape its own policies. I did notice, Chair, that the Minister said that it was likely that manufacturers would follow the EU standard. And I would question that if a government should really draft and implement regulations on the likelihood of something happening by an outside body that they seek to have no control over. So this isn't just an administrative issue, it has consequences. Businesses in Northern Ireland face additional costs and indeed compliance burdens, more so than the counterparts across Great Britain, who may ultimately avoid or actually have the ability to have a shape in saying how these regulations are enforced. So this places Northern Ireland and its consumers at a competitive disadvantage, creating yet another barrier to economic growth at a time when we should be supporting, not stifling investment, something we've been told by both this government and the previous would not happen under the Windsor framework. So while the goal of improving energy efficiency is commendable, imposing a rigid one-size-fits-all approach does not guarantee real progress. Indeed, it risks increasing costs for manufacturers and indeed consumers while delivering minimal environmental benefits. So I would ask, have we assessed whether these regulations will genuinely reduce energy consumption in a meaningful way? Or are we simply enforcing them for the sake of regulatory conformity? Because for Northern Ireland there is no consultation, no consultation with trade bodies, no consultation with consumer rights organisations, no consultation with families who, when their tumble dryer breaks down, who may have looked for a cheaper model or a second-hand one, where now they have to buy the one that meets the EU standards. So why should a constituent in South Antrim be able or have less access to buy different products than someone in Southampton? Can I ask also the Minister, in regards to consultation, it simply says in the body that they weren't because of previous outcomes of consultations. Why were trade bodies or consumer bodies not consulted in Northern Ireland? Was it because the government didn't want to hear their concerns, or let other honourable members in this committee know what they had to say, rather than simply assuming that they wouldn't raise any objections the way they did the last time? So, Chair, beyond the economic and environmental concerns, there is a broader constitutional issue at play. The government speaks of Northern Ireland as being an integral part of this United Kingdom, yet time and again we see it being subjected to different rules, dictated by external frameworks, and this raises that fundamental question. Are we truly committed to regulatory consistency across the United Kingdom, or is Northern Ireland to be permanently treated as a special case in this instance? So for these reasons, I would urge others to reject these regulations, and if consultation is appropriate for Great Britain, it should be appropriate for Northern Ireland as well as part of the United Kingdom. I believe, Chair, that anything less is unacceptable, and I would urge other members of the committee to oppose these measures.
Gerard Mayhew.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huck. I have nothing further to add on the meat of the debate than that which was put forward by the Honourable Member, my friend from West Suffolk. But I do rise just to explain and apologise for my delayed arrival, but as a teller in the previous votes, I came as quickly as I could, but I didn't mean any sort of rudeness to you in the chair, and I'm sorry for the delay.
I'm very politely, and it's on the record now. Jim Allister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The essence of these regulations is that a part of this United Kingdom should be subjected to regulation governing energy-related products, not by the laws made by this Parliament, not even by the laws made by the devolved Stormont institutions, but by laws made by a foreign Parliament, initiated by an unelected foreign institution, namely the European Commission, and that those are the laws which should be imposed on consumers and citizens of Northern Ireland. And that is because the right to make those laws, which any rational observer might have expected, that the right to make the laws of any part of a country would rest with the elected representatives of that country. But in fact, pursuant to the Protocol/Windsor framework, the right to make those laws was surrendered to that foreign polity. So that we have this absurd situation, illustrated by these regulations, that 7 new EU regulations are enforced automatically, unamendably upon citizens of the United Kingdom, whereby the very Parliament of that United Kingdom is prohibited from changing, amending, disapplying, or doing anything other than applying them because of the surrender to the EU of the lawmaking powers on these issues. It's all set out in graphic, frightening detail in Annex 2 of the Protocol, where you read 289 areas of law where the United Kingdom no longer, for Northern Ireland, can make any of those laws. And this is one of those ambits or areas of law. And of course that has many ramifications, including the fact and the very important democratic fact of disenfranchising the people of Northern Ireland was a fundamental principle of this nation, and indeed of any democratic nation, is that you live under the laws made by those you elect. But these laws are made by those no one in Northern Ireland elected, no one in the United Kingdom elected, but laws made by those who were elected by 27 foreign countries. That is the absurdity of what has been imposed in these regulations. And that of itself is of immense constitutional significance. And that, in truth, is why there is no consultation. There is no consultation about whether these laws should be applied to Northern Ireland or not, for the very simple reason that if there was, and the consultation suggests that they shouldn't, it couldn't be adhered to. It would only show up the impotency of Parliament and the institutions in the United Kingdom, because the right to make these laws has already been surrendered to a foreign parliament. Hence, the view of the government that there's no necessity or indeed point to consulting, because your hands are tied. And yet, when it comes to the suggestion that there might be similar regulations imposed in Great Britain, there has to be a consultation. Paragraph 72 of your explanatory document says there'll be such a consultation. Why? Because that's normal process. You don't impose something without going through the due process of consulting about it. But the very antithesis of that is what we're doing here tonight. We are imposing upon Northern Ireland that upon which we will not consult, because we've already sold the right to consult and the right to make any decision other than to impose them. But it's not just a constitutional issue. It's a practical economic issue. It applies to the vast range of energy-related products, from smartphones through to tumble dryers. But let's take the tumble dryers as an example. There are basically two types of tumble dryer. There's the convector or vented, and the heat pump tumble dryer. Under these regulations, it will become illegal to have a convector tumble dryer in Northern Ireland. It will be illegal for a retailer to sell one in Northern Ireland. It will be impossible for a manufacturer in Great Britain to complete an order to Northern Ireland for a convector tumble dryer. And a convector tumble dryer is such that it will operate at lower ambient temperatures. So many of them are in garages attached to houses, where a heat pump one wouldn't operate in those colder temperatures. So what we're saying to the people of Northern Ireland is, you cannot any longer have a British-made convector tumble dryer in your garage. Why? Because the EU says you can't. I think of the magnitude of the absurdity of that citizens of this United Kingdom are dictated to, not by the democratic mandate of this House, but by the undemocratic control of a foreign parliament. And that is the abiding absurdity of these regulations. And the government's answer to all of this, in part, is going to be, and we're going to see it tomorrow in the product regulation bill, and we're seeing it in the government's approach to these regulations. The government's answer is, well, then we'll probably just align the whole of the United Kingdom to the same EU standards. What was the point of Brexit? The whole point of Brexit, we were told, was so as we could be master in our own house, make our own regulations. But now, we're going to simply re-regulate back into line with the EU. So I do say that this is a very retrograde step. And one other very important thing about these regulations, they provide that there won't be a further debate about matters such as this with further new EU regulations. All there will be a statement by a minister that they've come into effect. There will never again, courtesy of what you're approving tonight, be a debate, a discussion, a delegated registration committee, or on the floor of the House about new measures, because that is being surrendered as well. And that was confirmed by Lord Hunt in the other place. So I do say to this committee, though I know whipped as you are, you won't do it, I do say to this committee that this is a step you should not take. You should have some thought for your fellow citizens in the rest of the United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland, and stand up for the right that they should be governed by laws that this Parliament can make, that this Parliament can change, and not subject colony-like, because that's what it is, colony-like, to the laws of others. Thank you.
Any more for any more? In that case, we go to Minister Miatta van Hille to respond to all that lot.
Thank you, Chair. I thank the honourable members for their valuable contribution to this debate. And I'd just start by saying that we have our obligations under the Windsor Framework that was passed with an overwhelming majority in this House. We are not here to litigate the rights and wrongs of that. That has already been done. We are here to discuss the specific regulations that are being put in place. And critically, these regulations are about improving the efficiency of products that we believe will be good for consumers and good for businesses and create opportunities.
Would the Minister give way?
Happy to give way.
Surely the truth is that what we're here to do is to impose regulations that the EU thinks will be better for consumers because they treat Northern Ireland as EU territory. These are not the regulations of the United Kingdom government.
What I would say to the honourable member is that we absolutely have looked at these regulations. We believe that these regulations, as the UK government, we believe that these regulations are good for consumers. And in fact, the ambition that's been set by these regulations is one that we wish to mirror ourselves. So we will be consulting on these standards, not because the EU is telling us to, but because we think it is the right thing for UK businesses. We think it is the right thing for consumers. I would point out that the vast majority of manufacturers who not only sell within the GB market, but they also sell within the EU market, are already making this transition because it is a much bigger market. And so they are already driving up product standards. That is a good thing for businesses. And it is one that we want to support and that we want to encourage. And what I would say is, I hear the arguments that we made. I hear the caution about not being dictated by the EU. Please hear me when I say we absolutely think it is right that we drive up the standards for our consumers. We would want to do this. The EU have done it, but we would want to do it in our own right. And that is the reason why we are putting forward this SI, but that is the reason that we are also planning to consult on improved standards.
And I thank the Minister for giving way in regards, when I made my opening comment, it wasn't about being anti in regards to the cost saving or the energy saving that these regulations will be brought about. What I will question the Minister is, why is it right then for them to be enforced now on Northern Ireland? Set aside the Windsor Framework and the implications. As a UK Minister, why does she feel it is right and proper that the rest of the UK then gets to be consulted on, gets to engage, and people actually get to have their say? Or is the Minister really saying to this House that, you see, when the time comes, we're going to tell you anyway because it's the right thing to do, so we're doing it. So the consultation that she's actually talking about in 7.2 in her explanation note is actually going to be fictitious as well, because what she is, it sounds to me, is that she's going to do it anyway, this government's going to do it anyway, while the opposition sits in their hands.
Well, look, what I would say is that we are trying to work within the Windsor Framework. We are not here to litigate that. That sets out a set of protocols and procedures that we are working under. EU rules have come forward. It is right that we make sure that we create the legal framework so that this applies in Northern Ireland. But critically, irrespective of all of that, I would take you to the fact that what is being proposed the basics of what being proposed are good for consumers. It is about improving the efficiency of products. It is about improving the design of products. It's actually about improving, in the case of smartphones, some of the protections that are available to consumers. You should want that, the Honourable Member should want that in its own right. We want that as a government in our own right, irrespective of whether you want to litigate the Windsor Framework or not. So we are putting forward the SI because we believe it is the right thing to do. We believe that it is important that we improve and drive up standards. It is something that we will consult on because we think this is a good proposition. And what I'd say is that all the engagement that we've had with manufacturers are supportive of the direction of travel. Because they want to sell into the EU market, that is setting the default for industry. And so it's in that spirit that we are putting forward the SI today. So I commend these regulations to the House.
The question is that the committee has considered the Ecodesign for Energy-Related and Energy Information Amendment Northern Ireland Regulations 2025. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no?
No.
I think the ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.